Hello there, this is Shane from Shane's Books and Review. Glad to see you made it till Friday. I hope your week was a good one, and if it wasn't, I'm sorry. But here's hope that it'll get better. Now, since it is Friday, it's time for our discussion video, and today we're going to be talking about Stephen King, specifically Elevation, which is a small collection, 2 short stories that were based out of Castle Rock. These 2 short stories are indeed short stories. The second one we'll talk about first, simply because I want to get this out there. Whenever I see Stephen King's name, he used to, well, I don't want to sound like I'm being attacking or talking down about Stephen King, because I'm not. I have enjoyed reading his works. He's come out with a lot of publications over the years, which is, you already know this, but what I'm getting at is that I expected, because his name was on it, for it to be more along the lines of the epic type things that he's wrote. But in the same token, I knew it was a novella from the get-go, so I didn't really know what to expect, but I was hoping, and I kind of felt a little down about it. Whenever I got over my initial, this isn't a typical Stephen King epic world, epic issue, incredibly out there sci-fi book, I realized that they're just 2 simple short stories. That's obvious, but whenever your expectations are so high and then that doesn't get delivered, that can be problematic for people like myself. Whenever I got past my own personal plight, and I actually reread it, because I read it twice. I had to, because the first time I read it, I was like, this is such a ... But whenever I reread it, and I read it for what it was intended to be, because I went into it completely blind and just picked it up and read it, then I was actually able to appreciate the short stories for what they are. There we go. The reasoning behind that and for that is the second story, which is Laurie, is a story about a man that has lost his wife and his sister trumping him into taking on the responsibilities of a dog. His transformations because of that dog. It was a good little story. It wasn't a very meaty story. There wasn't a whole lot of pages to it, but it was a good one, because the guy actually stops being such a stubborn old guy, accepts something new into his life that's loving and cherishes him, and we watch him go from absolutely not to maybe. Quite frankly, because of that, in the end, that saved him in a way, but also, if he had said no to the animal altogether, he wouldn't have been in that situation to begin with, and there wouldn't have been a short story. It was a decent story. It wasn't anything that I would expect from Stephen King, but that story was so simplistic. Whenever I reread it, I actually enjoyed it quite a bit, because whenever I stopped trying to find the sci-fi mystical, it was decent. And of course, with Stephen King, the dialogue is always so good, and it's always so natural. If a character needs to use explicitives, they do. If they don't, they don't. The characters and the interactions between characters are always spot on. It's because of that natural dialogue ability that he has. That's the reason why I was able to accept that as a short story from him whenever I read it the second time. It added so much more flavor to it. He gets a pass on this one. Now, about the first story, which was called Elevation. That might have been the reason why I was expecting that sci-fi magical mystical moment of mirth and merriment to come out in the middle of the second story, because the first one does have an element of that to it. The long of the short is there's a gentleman that ends up with a life-changing event, being that he thinks that he's sick, but he's not sure. He doesn't really want to talk to his main doctor about it, because he doesn't want to end up on a slab and being studied by science. He knows that this would not be a good thing, as most people would know. But he has got a friend of his that, I think it was that they play golf together. They start talking about it, and he shares this with his friend that was a doctor for many a year. It ends up becoming a thing where he ends up with a very close-knit group of friends because of this illness, as well as helping out some people before the story ends. There's a lot of that dialogue that I was talking about in Laurie that's in Elevation. And Scott Carey is the main character that is suffering from this thing that's happening. Woman couple that have got married and moved into this small town. And the small town is highly political. Their ideas and acceptance levels of a couple like that is incredibly low, unfortunately. I've never really understood that whole mentality. I don't know if it was my upbringing or what it was, but I don't care who or what you are. I don't care. It doesn't matter. You are you, as the same as I am me. And there's a separation there between me and you and what you do, as long as you don't hurt me or anybody that I know or anybody else. Okay. And I wish that more people thought that way. But in that town, these people wouldn't even give this couple a chance to open a restaurant. They had opened it. They had really good food, but nobody would go there to eat. It was unfortunate, really. And there's a lot of that happens even these days. I mean, that's not an old mentality. Things like that still happen. It is through Scott that they find that acceptance that they so desperately need to be able to have a successful business, one, but also so they can have their own self-discovery moments and learn to relax and finally be accepted into the community that they chose that seems to be rejecting them. So the question is, would I recommend reading the book? Well, there's one thing to know before you do, and if you haven't figured it out, it's not a typical Stephen King book. So don't go in expecting The Dark Tower. Don't expect to see Roland. Don't expect to see any kind of thing like that. But what I think this is I think it's kind of a framework, because he's always writing in specific areas that he knows, it seems like. Every once in a while, he'll have a story where it's not a place he knows, and you can by God tell. You can really tell. But it's almost like he's creating this whole new set of characters and this whole new town and this whole new atmosphere for maybe something a little bit bigger. And these little short stories might be introductions to characters that will be in these stories, and it might be a magical place by the time he gets done with it. And that is what kind of has me excited about this. Update, edit. Yes, I had to add this in. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just overly excited for no reason. And I somehow had missed this other book that he had let loose, which was Gwendy's Button Box. Have you read that? I haven't. I guess I will, now that I've read this. Apparently there was an interview that he had with, I believe it was Entertainment Weekly, and in that interview he mentioned that this one wasn't necessarily a sequel, but maybe a tie-in, or maybe it's a tie-in but not a sequel, however that works. Perhaps that will be the thing. Maybe this will be a new area, or a new thing, or a new line. So I'm definitely going to get that one and check it out as well. As always, like, share, subscribe. This was our discussion video about Elevation from Stephen King, and the other short story in there, Lori. Till Monday, I hope that you have a wonderful weekend. This is Shane from Shane's Books and Review, and I will see you on Monday.